Previously on Detour Hotel.
Can you tell us what he was looking at when he died? Fleet asked. It's not stored here. It's on the cloud and it's encrypted. It'll take a little while to figure out what it was. It's not impossible, though, Mike told him. How'd you know something went wrong? I got a notification that he had ceased to interact. Essentially that he woke up. That's normal. We're supposed to go touch up with him a couple minutes later and make sure they're up and on their way. I took a couple minutes to let him get up and around, then I went in there and he was unresponsive, Mike explained. Chapter 34. Seaford Homes is a rhombus-shaped complex of 6 two-story buildings made up exclusively of 1-1 apartments. Seaford occupies half a block of a particularly unscenic stretch of Tidewater Drive in central Norfolk. 8 units per building, 4 up, 4 down. The front doors radiate from a central exposed breezeway with gently cracked concrete and a mauve stucco exterior. The resident of Unit 14 is trying. She has a potted rosemary bush on the step and has spooky party store Halloween decorations draped about her alcove. Many units are vacant. Unit 8 had a structure fire in the spring and hasn't been remodeled. Black blooms of smoke damage still christen the south window frame. Across the street is the remains of a service merchandise that's been partly converted to a methadone clinic named Claremont Station, where chain-smoking bruisers and lonely day laborers line up at 5 a.m. waiting for the morning bump. Their omnipresent loitering became a hallmark of the neighborhood even before the Plasma Donation Center opened across the way. Claremont's curb is punctuated by protruding yellow posts that the regulars use as placeholders in line should they need to make a run to the sit-go across the intersection for smokes or coffee. The posts were installed 2 years ago after some junkie that no one claimed they recognized nodded off as they made the parking lot and plowed through the front window. The place was closed for 3 weeks, and though it can't be scientifically proven, overdoses in the area tripled by Sunday morning. Beyond Claremont's extents are acres of low-rise buildings that house various jaded-looking industrial outfits with cryptic names like Imperial Stone or HR Poly or the Aero Group. The parking lots are always completely empty. The pressed rubber bumpers on the loading docks are faded and strings dangle from their decaying base stitch. The streetlights are those old Y-shaped pylons from the 1960s that have large plastic enclosures on the end of their antenna. Cops often park nose to tail with one another in front of the Aero Group, chatting from window to window about the beat, eyeing Tidewater closely. Dusk had fallen on Seaford Homes as Fleet whipped into a guest spot and unbuckled his seatbelt. He adjusted his jacket and hustled through the sleet to the breezeway of the first building. The placard read, "Upstairs, 24 to 27. Fleet could hear the call of birds as he double-checked the address on his phone. Unit 26. He put his phone away and squinted at the orange glow of the hallway light. He plodded up the stairs and knocked on the door. He turned a circle as he waited for a response. As he attempted a second knock, a young woman with dyed hair opened the door and wiped her nose. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Evening. I'm Detective Victor Norfleet with Norfolk PD. You can call me Fleet. I'm here to take a statement regarding an incident today at Sandbox. I understand that's your place of employment?" She nodded and slinked back behind the door. "Yep." "And your name is Kimmy Hitch Wren." "My name's Wren, but yeah, if we're talking about what's on my driver's license, then I'm little old Kimmy Hitchcock," she said. "All right. Kimmy, may I ask you a few questions about Sandbox, and more specifically any customers at the establishment?" he asked. Wren poked her head out and squirmed against the back of the door. "Sure, go ahead." "It's just a couple of procedural questions. Did you come back here after you left the Experience Salon?" he asked. "I did. Is this official record? Do I need to hear my rights before I say anything?" 2 small birds soared through the breezeway and landed in the complex of nests above the stairwell. "You aren't being detained. You don't have to be Mirandized. You can choose to answer these questions as you wish, but they are going to be official record. This afternoon, a man named Clayton Doyle expired while having an experience in Sandbox. Your associate, Mike Stern, told us that you worked Doyle up prior to clocking out. We just want to create a high-quality timeline of events for our investigation. He'll undergo a post-mortem to determine cause of death, Fleet explained to her. They'll find out why he expired, she stated. Correct. Were you aware that Mr. Doyle had passed away? Fleet asked. No, that's shocking, Wren said. She took a deep breath and leaned against the grimy white door frame. To the best of your knowledge, do you know of other instances in which patients have expired while having an experience? He asked. She looked up to the ceiling and thought, we don't call them patients. If we like them, we call them travelers, and if we don't, we call them mooks or creeps, she explained. Do you know of any mooks, creeps, or travelers that have expired while within an experience? He repeated himself. To be honest, there was this guy just a few weeks ago that died. I gave a statement then, too, she said. Creeping embarrassment grew to a bloom on her cheeks. She felt sick. Her nose continued to run despite the 3 over-the-counter antihistamines that she'd taken after she arrived home. They were only succeeding in making her heart race. Fleet shifted his stance and continued his line of questioning. Do you see a common element in these crimes? He asked. She fought the urge to rub her nose again. Are they crimes? Fleet nodded. Well, that's what I'm here to check out. 2 points doesn't make a trend, but it raises a flag or two. Well, as for common elements, they were both white males, middle-aged, terrible personalities. They were regular customers, unmarried, middle class. Fleet jotted this down as fast as he could. She looked over his shoulder to see a flock of geese waddling across the parking lot. Did you notice anything about Mr. Doyle this afternoon that was out of the ordinary? She scoffed and twisted the doorknob back and forth. No. Same old, same old. She was beginning to get thirsty. How intense could an experience get for a traveler? He asked her. She took her time to compose a simple response. The less information, the better. However intense they can make it, if they do a sandbox, they can essentially do whatever they want in the simulation space, she explained. He finished writing and took a moment to get a read on the subject. Flushed ears. Hiding behind the door. Swallowing repeatedly. Whatever they want? Fleet asked. She looked up at him and replied, Unfortunately, yes. There aren't any boundaries in the sandbox. Fleet saw the conversation pivot on this statement. The glassy nonchalance of her reply belied her beleaguered eyes. The way that she had said unfortunately spoke volumes. Her casual contempt for customers was an applied affectation masking a deeper shock at the news of Doyle's death. The ramifications were setting in for her. She was involved, good or bad. She had knowledge. She had difficult choices to make in this conversation. He adjusted his approach and continued. I'm sorry. I called you Kimmy. I apologize, Wren. I'll use Wren from now on, he said. She looked away and continued to twist the doorknob back and forth. Wren, what time was Doyle's appointment today? 3. And what time did you leave, approximately? I left at probably 3:15, she said. At that point, was Doyle involved in an experience? He was settling in. It takes about 15 minutes to engage, so yeah, he was probably getting pretty into it at that point, she told him. She could hear the couple next door arguing through the wall. Do you mind if we step inside? He asked. Wren couldn't refuse. Sure, she agreed. She felt exceptionally tiny. She was sure that Fleet would have to duck to come inside. She imagined him driving a car with his head out of the sunroof. He cleared the door of her studio apartment with a few inches to spare and gestured for her to take a seat at the cafe table near the door. She closed the door behind him and took a seat. He pulled his jacket to the side and folded his hands as he sat. Tell me about the waivers that people sign. Do they cover bodily injury? He asked. I think so. You'll have to ask Leo about the details, Wren said. She pulled her knees up to her chest and bit her thumb. Fleet's slow settling had deflated some fluttering terror in Wren. He was avuncular, confident, driven. He had made himself thoroughly comfortable before he spoke again. Wren watched him lick his lips and straighten his collar. Do the waivers have exclusions? For example, if someone doesn't use the hardware correctly? He asked. We can monitor their progress. Most of the time we don't. We have the ability to eject people from a simulation if something's going wrong, she told him. It's your policy to eject people from a situation if they're in peril or if it violates your code of conduct? He asked. Wren buried her face in her hands. Simulation, not situation. Fleet blithely extended a lifted palm as an apology. It's not official, but yes, we can seize a simulation, she said. He spun a pen in his fingers. It's rare that somebody ejects? She nodded. Maybe 1 out of 100 people. Some people want out because they're flipping out for some reason. Some people don't wake up normally. There's a variety of reasons that people cease to interact and don't eject right away. They're not supposed to drink beforehand, for one. Fleet looked up at the bookcase and sighed. Did Mr. Stroot eject properly? He asked. Wren's butterflies went up in flames. Her head spun as she tried to keep it together. Fleet knew the name of the man who had died last month. He probably knew a lot more than he was letting on. Of course he did. Wren rocked gingerly in the chair. He did not. He wasn't in good shape, she told him. The couple next door slammed 2 doors in quick succession. What was Mr. Stroot looking at in the simulation? Fleet asked. Wren looked at the table. She was terribly nervous without the ability to doodle or take notes. I can't say. These things are confidential, she said. Fleet nodded his head and looked around the dim room. Clothes were draped on the back of the couch. A stack of wine bottles crowded one another in a box next to the door. We'll see what we can get a warrant for. I asked you this before, but let me try it again. Did you see anything out of the ordinary today? You don't have to be specific, he told her. She wiped her face with her sleeve. She did not know what to tell him. Doyle always did things that were out of the ordinary. Were they things like what Mr. Stroot would experience? He asked. She pushed her face into her hands and gently nodded her head yes. Fleet put pen to the paper of his notepad but did not write. Could it be a hardware malfunction? Something that the machine isn't equipped to handle? He asked. Wren thought carefully about her response. This was the truth tightrope that she'd have to walk if she was to vindicate herself. She took a deep breath and sat back in her chair. There is an error for when a person violates some boundary of the simulation. I don't have enough examples to tell you that that was what happened, but it's likely. I thought the sandbox didn't have any boundaries. Maybe we need to define boundary, he told her. It's a continuity error. It's called Error 36. The text says, object reference is not set to the instance of an object. It's a class of master error, she said. Error 36 had occurred before, but it had never caused an eject. She knew better. From what I can tell, it wasn't a hardware malfunction. The cease to interact notification was triggered. Mike told us that it proceeded nominally before he discovered Doyle's condition, Fleet said. She nodded. They spent nearly 30 seconds staring at one another. Wren felt completely out of control of her body language. She parted her lips to ask if she could put on a sweatshirt, but she held off at the last moment. The silence continued. Why did you leave early today? He asked. I was tired. I'm tired too, he said. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Fleet continued. You're also scared. And you're also smart. I don't buy that you left because you were tired. She dropped her head and gazed at the metal folding table. Fleet drew a large octothorpe on his notepad and pushed it to the center of the table. I'll make you a deal. We'll have a game of tic-tac-toe. As soon as it's over, this interview's over. I ask a question, I get to write down an X. You answer, and you get to draw an O. A real short game. Does that help you focus your attention? She looked at the crudely drawn lines on the yellow legal pad. He had taken quite a few notes, but his penmanship was nearly illegible. Tic-tac-toe always ends in a cat's game if both people know what they're doing, she told him. He leaned forward and drew an X in the center of the board. Are experiences of a sexual nature common in the simulations? He asked. Fleet's features were overlit by the 3 cheap filament bulbs of the chrome light fixture. He placed the pen on the table and folded his hands. She examined the pen. White body, standard issue length and diameter, black cap, ball point. A perfect silence held between them. She picked up the pen and drew an O in the upper right corner. Experiences of a sexual nature are pretty much the reason that we're in business, she said. She squeezed the pen in her right hand for a few seconds before realizing that she needed to give it back. She placed it on the pad between them. Fleet watched her fuss with her hair and shift in the chair. He picked up the pen and put an X in the top center. Have you ever felt harassed or intimidated by mooks? She felt knots tighten in her chest. She could lose on purpose after this question and get away with only 3 questions and 2 answers. Would he intentionally win? Surely he wouldn't allow her to win. He wanted as many answers as he could get. She reached out for the pen and he handed it to her. She left the tip of the pen a fraction of an inch above the paper as she deliberated. She drew an O in the bottom center, extending the game. I don't feel intimidated every day, but most days I do. 90% of our customers are toxic males. I have ways to cope. I try not to let it bother me. Fleet remained blank. She handed him the pen and drew her arms around herself. Fleet quickly made an X in the middle right. Have you reported any of the mooks' activities to your supervisor? Wren answered before she could get the pen. A couple of them. I've reported a couple of them. Not that it's mattered, but yeah, I hate a couple of them especially bad. The heater kicked on and brought a ratty strand of prayer flags to life as she drew an O in the middle left. Fleet's unflinching stare was gargantuan. A warmth followed in its wake. Wren felt surrounded yet secure in asserting herself. If Fleet was judging her, his conclusions were impossible to ascertain. She felt like he knew the mooks. Maybe he was tired of the mooks too. If he wanted her to believe that he was also tired of the mooks, well, maybe she could buy it. Maybe that kinship was worth more than any ramification. Fleet picked up the pen and placed an X in the upper left corner. The cat's game was now insured. Do you believe in good and evil? He asked. She took a moment to think about her response. I do. And I think that a person can be both. I always thought of angels as just a different kind of monster. How's that? Any one thing can be multiple things to multiple people. Our experience of an event can differ. Mercy is so close to suffering that sometimes it's both. Justice is a decision that spares some and damns others, she said. She took a deep breath and quickly wiped a tear from her eye. Fleet gestured to the pen and she drew an O in the bottom right. Wren felt exhausted but confident that she'd been understood. Fleet had designed the experience of this interview well. He wasn't out to win. He also would not lose. He wasn't necessarily himself, not for her. He had removed a significant element of himself from the proceedings. He was monolithic. She felt an odd kinship ignite. Fleet drew an X in the last available slot and pulled the legal pad back to his side of the table. One more question, Wren. What the heck is in the vitamin? She laughed and answered without hesitation, a rush of catharsis rolling over her as if she'd landed safely from some reckless acrobatic routine. 3 milligrams of concentrated CBD oil, 50 milligrams magnesium, and 500 mg of dextromorphin, and a couple of emulsifiers and other inert things. It's a genius combination, really. Fleet raised his eyebrows and pushed the pad back across the table. I lied. One last question. Could you write that down for me? Chapter 35. At 9:30 on Friday morning, Fleet waved to Reynolds from across the police department break room. Reynolds let a group of staff members pass by before marching over with his newly full coffee cup. He raised his eyebrows to engage Fleet. "This is it, man. We received the data from Sandbox a little while ago. It's a video." "Perfect. Your place or mine?" "I got ready to go on my machine," Fleet said. He slapped Reynolds on the shoulder and they set off across the office. "Did you peek? What's it like?" Reynolds asked. Fleet gritted his teeth and speculated about how to describe it. "I haven't watched the whole thing yet." Reynolds kept both hands on his full coffee as they journeyed through halls of bustling police activity, unwinding dispatchers heading off to smoke, rattling printers, ringing phones. Fleet's office was on the southernmost point of the second floor. "Close the door, please," Fleet told Reynolds. He flung the door of Fleet's office closed and loosened his tie. "Should I make some popcorn?" Reynolds asked. Fleet chuckled. He moved a stack of papers from in front of his monitor and tilted it so that Reynolds could see. Reynolds turned off one of the 2 overhead fluorescent lights and came to stand behind Fleet. "Let's see what Mr. Doyle was up to." "I didn't do much but skip through the first couple minutes to get to the real beginning. You couldn't see any of the employees. It was kind of like a blank room until Doyle shows up," Fleet said. He pressed play on the media player. The vision of a brightly lit white room was slightly concave as if to give the impression of a 360-degree view of three-dimensionality. At the center of the room, seated in a wooden chair, was a 5 to 7-year-old boy dressed in blue clothing. Fleet put his hand under his chin. Reynolds took a pensive seat on the arm of the office chair and squinted his eyes to watch the monitor. The field of vision quivered slightly as the viewer tested his faculty. "Get up," a voice commanded the boy. The boy stood. The camera's view approached the boy. A white man's right hand reached out and touched the boy's hair. The hand grabbed a fistful of blonde hair and shook the boy's head. Reynolds sneered. The left hand grabbed hold of the boy's blue t-shirt and bundled up the fabric. He picked the boy up and shook him around. Fleet sat back in his chair. "This is fucking weird," Reynolds said. He got up and closed the blinds of the office window. On the screen, the hands were now choking the boy. "You getting a feeling about this?" Fleet said. "I had a feeling about this 2 weeks ago," Reynolds said. The hands had thrown the boy to the ground. The boy did not protest. He was slow to react. He was not real. But the things that quickly followed looked extremely real to the 2 officers of the law. Reynolds stood up and turned away from the monitor. "For Christ's sake, who do we send this to? The FBI? CIA? "We're the authorities here, unfortunately," Fleet said. The boy on the video began to cry. "Did you know it was going to be like this? I'd have appreciated a warning, maybe," Reynolds scolded Fleet. "I didn't watch this part. Hey, look," Fleet said. He pointed at the screen. The point of view of the video had turned away from the boy. In the corner of the room was an outline of a hissing static, roughly like that of a human figure. "It's another character," Fleet said. He leaned forward to focus. The static figure appeared to notice the attention of the viewer. It flickered with electric intensity, several times a second wiping with big bursts of sizzling interference. It was humanoid, average size and weight, but overall the figure had few defining features. "Who are you?" Doyle said. The shape stretched its arms out wide. The static flowed outward from the center of the strange being. Fleet sat back in surprise as the video shook violently. The footage abruptly cut out and the media player prompted Fleet to replay or close the window. "What the hell? That's it?" Fleet said. Reynolds raised his eyebrows. "Play it again, just the last part, though," Reynolds said. Fleet backed the video up by 10 seconds. The static figure was caught in a flickering pause. "That is definitely a person," Reynolds said. "A real person or a sandbox person?" "I don't know the difference," Reynolds said. He leaned over and pressed play. The static figure once again extended its arms, exploded into static, and the video ceased. "Our boy got waxed," Fleet said. He rubbed his eyes. "I don't know about that, or if that's how you should characterize this. He must have imagined it. He imagined the kid. You can't see what this thing actually did to him," Reynolds said. "True. Suppose this was his conscience or something like it." They spent a few moments of thick silence in the paper-filled office. "I think we ought to call Mulder and Scully on this shit," Reynolds laughed. The play button on the video flashed in pause mode. Fleet couldn't laugh. He could barely hold back from punching a hole in the wall. The architect said that there aren't boundaries on the system, but that objects can fail to render and it causes an error. Maybe this was an entity that failed to render. I don't know if any of this is normal, though. Bro, that shit was not normal, Reynolds said. Fleet looked at a picture of his wife and kids and sighed. I know. I don't know what to think. I just committed what I think is a felony by watching this video. My temptation is to take this file, delete it, then write a report saying it's conclusive that this creep had some sort of psychotic episode resulting in death. And then I'll spend the rest of my life trying to do my best to not remember anything about what I saw today. This is child molestation, and I'll defend that in an accusation in court if it comes to it. I don't care if the kid was real or not, Fleet said. He gripped his hands together in anger. Agreed, but we have to describe this somehow. What if something else like this happens? Reynolds said. Fleet looked around the office again. If there's another error like this, you're asking? Convenient time for an error, but yeah, what if this happens again? It's error 36. Hitchcock mentioned it. They know about it. A hard stop during the simulation. She said that it was unpredictable and rare, but I don't 100% believe her. It's not out of the question that it could cause brain damage from the shock, Fleet said. We'd have to prove that. Even then, how would we see it coming in the outline of a person? I haven't read all the paperwork that they make these people sign. It might say don't diddle kids or else you get murdered, for all I know. Reynolds shook his head and looked at the screen. Fleet grimaced. After what I just seen this guy do, I'm certainly tempted to say that he made the system crash. If I were them, the company I mean, that's what I'd say. He broke the system. I wouldn't begin to defend this kind of behavior. That's a worse look than having people die from watching porn that's too good, Reynolds said. That is one way to cover your ass. You think they could have scrubbed the data? Fleet asked. He rocked side to side in the office chair. Reynolds chewed on the cap of a pen. If it were me, I would have scrubbed the kid out before giving us the data, but I don't think they edited that at all. I think we got the whole shebang. Then again, I'd want the police to see the whole thing too. It tells a real story. I agree. They didn't send along any statement or description. This was just on a thumb drive. No markings. And we're sure it's from them, Reynolds asked. It's in their branded envelope with their return address delivered by a bicycle courier from their neighborhood. No effort to conceal anything, Fleet said. Suppose they concealed the character in static, Reynolds asked. Fleet looked up to the dusty mini blinds in his office window. Could be. He asked who the figure was. He didn't recognize him even if it was unconcealed. Reynolds had picked up a foam squeeze ball shaped like a water droplet. He was vigorously palpating it with his right hand. I'm sure they've lawyered up. I'm sure they have. You know, a quote comes to mind, Reynolds, Fleet said. Lay it on me. Fleet sat back in his chair and took a deep breath. Guiltiness will speak as though tongues were out of use. It's from Othello. Reynolds stared blankly. Break that down for me, he requested. Fleet stood and took off his jacket. Guilt is absolute. Actions speak for themselves. A million things can be said about the matter at hand, but guilt is some category of objective truth. It tends to make its way to the surface. It's a line spoken by Iago, one of the greatest villains of all time, Fleet said. He cleared his throat and continued. It's a turning point in the play. He offers this statement that incriminates himself to the cast. He dares those present to challenge his guilt. He believes that he's deceived successfully. The audience knows that he's arranged murder, but the other characters in the scene don't. I played Othello in high school. It was the only lead role I ever got. The guy that played Iago is one of my good friends. We practiced our lines together. And we talked about that line extensively. I still think about it. Reynolds took a drink of his coffee and posed a question. All right then. If guilt is absolute, self-evident or whatever, in this case, what do we put in the report? Fleet unbuttoned the cuffs of his shirt and rolled up his sleeves. Othello said it best. Had all his hairs been lives, my great revenge had stomach for them all. Fleet paced and continued. In short, if this was an instance of vengeance, maybe it was well earned. The mechanism matters little. Fleet recalled the nervous quaking of the young woman in her apartment. her volleys of candor about the demands of the position, and her obvious regret. She'd clearly seen a great many instances of the kind of brutality that they'd just seen. She coolly gritted her teeth again and again as he had questioned her. Fleet looked over to the stripes of broken static on the television and closed his eyes. "What did the autopsy say again?" Fleet asked. Reynolds dug through a folder that he located on the corner of the desk. "Intracranial aneurysm," he replied. Fleet nodded his head. "Since I'm signing the report, I'd conclude that it was a medical emergency. Intracranial aneurysm. Leave it to the personal injury lawyers. We got a lot to do today." "The arson summit's going to take up all afternoon," Fleet said. He closed the media player window. Reynolds wadded up his paper coffee cup and tossed it into the garbage can. Fleet opened his notepad and scribbled with a smile. "What are you grinning about?" Reynolds asked. "I had a great idea. I usually assign my boy a book report when he gets grounded. Next up, I think I'll make him read Othello." Chapter 36. Doyle was a native of the fantasy realm. He was entirely divorced from reality, a real-life troll that thought little of his actions and possible ramifications. He didn't care if you were shocked or upset. Nothing seemed to satisfy him for long. What bothered me most about him was that occasionally he reminded me of myself. He caught on to the capabilities of manifesting physical figures almost immediately. He was good at it. He had an attention to detail that would have been seriously useful as an architect or at least as a power user. But he wasn't interested in that. He chose to use his power for evil. He actively chose it. He knew that I knew his sick deeds and he didn't care. He found out my real name and called me Kimmy on purpose. He started out by slipping inappropriate behavior into pre-programmed circumstances. Grabbing an NPC's boobs, lighting things on fire, run-of-the-mill teenage immature crap. Doyle was 35 years old. Shortly after we started offering total sandbox sessions, he went full Jeffrey Dahmer. He performed increasingly bizarre and sadistic acts on men, women, children, animals. He was beyond redemption. Maybe we ended up doing a service by keeping this creep's sexual urges off the street and in a space where he could act it out by completely sinking his sickness into the simulation space. Who knows what he did outside the simulations? He was probably a model employee at a cabinet manufacturer or whatever it is he did for a living. Allegedly, he worked for the city of Norfolk. I didn't care. I didn't want to live in the same world as him. As an aside, that's kind of a hot topic among architects, whether the high-quality experiences that we provide allow potential offenders to scratch the itch. He certainly wasn't the only one doing this. There's a subreddit dedicated to extreme experiences in salons because of course there is. He won't be the last. I wasn't interested in running a therapy clinic. I wanted to build people up. I wanted to do good. I tried to do good. I still do. Doyle stole energy from me. Energy that I could have used to guide others and make them happy. I was young then. Well, I'm still young. If I ever get old, I hope that I'll stop hurting over what I did. I don't deserve to hurt this much. When he walked in that day, I knew what he wanted to do. I could see how pale and strange he was. I saw his name on the appointments tab when I first showed up for my shift. Honestly, I felt destructive that day. I felt as though I had the capability to defend my beliefs and destroy some other vein of evil that existed outside of me, like there was something new and awesome within me, and I could exercise it with reckless abandon. Let me put it like this. If you could suddenly fly, but you could only do it at night, would you have trouble sleeping? Doyle had always slinked in and out of the salon with a kind of creepy gait that made it seem like he was leaving a snail trail behind him. He glistened. He was always a known quantity, yet there was one terrible day earlier on that I still used to ward away the guilt over his untimely death, the guilt that sulks in my subconscious mind. He had just finished one of his sessions doing who knows what sick and twisted thing. I came in and started the checkout process. He was starting to stir in the chair. I went over to him and loosened his ankle restraints. Something swiped across my cheek, his fingers. I looked up at him and he had this terrible, awful grin. I could smell it right away. He'd wiped his semen on me. His pupils were entirely dilated in evil reverie. I don't remember if I screamed or if I cussed, but I feel like I did both. I didn't want to touch it to wipe it away. I gagged multiple times. I filed a complaint, but of course nothing came of it. Nothing was ever going to happen unless I did something myself. We live in a culture of silence. He was constantly abetted. I couldn't prove anything. That's what they had said, at least. It was sexual assault. To me, it was sexual assault. I wish I could have said that my word was enough to make something happen. It wasn't. It just became this story that other employees told about how vile the customers were. Did you hear what you-know-who did? Crazy, bro. Sick. I guess that in a way I was eventually vindicated. The Norfolk Police Department believed me when I said that the static figure was part of an error elicited by his behavior. I know they saw the footage. I was freaked out and mostly honest with them, and I think that they pitied me. I hope that they did, if not for what happened to Doyle, but for the things that I would end up losing afterward. Edith Piaf's last words were, "Every damn thing you do in this life, you have to pay for." Intracranial aneurysm. End of story.
On the next Detour Hotel. No one knew what Harper was doing in that part of town at that time of night. Had he been driven mad by the loss of his daughter? Was he a lost soul, a man who had simply had enough of the wicked world around him? Many speculated that he had uncovered a conspiracy about the death of his daughter and had identified her killers. It was reported in the press as a tragic misunderstanding. Detour Hotel is written, recorded, and produced by me, Aaron Rogge, in rainy Nashville, Tennessee. Additional music by Lee Rosevere, Airglow, and Soft and Furious, licensed under Creative Commons 3.0. This work is adapted from a novel of the same name, by the same person, and is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to real people or occurrences is a coincidence. Paperback and Kindle versions of Detour Hotel are available on Amazon. Thanks for listening.